A little orphan girl begged not to be adopted by a rich man after spending a day with him. What she said in court left the judge horrified. The imposing courtroom fell silent as 7-year-old Brittany Adams's desperate cry pierced the air. "Please stop. I can't do this." Her small body trembled uncontrollably in the witness stand, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. The adoption hearing, which moments ago had been proceeding smoothly, ground to a sudden halt. Philip Mason, the wealthy businessman who had spent weeks preparing to welcome Brittany into his home, sat frozen in his chair, his expression a mixture of shock and concern. The stack of adoption papers before Judge Robert Williams remained unsigned, forgotten in the wake of the child's emotional outburst. "But I don't want to be adopted," Brittany's voice cracked, her blue eyes wide with panic. "Not if it means leaving Denise behind. She's my sister not by blood, but by heart. Please don't make me choose." The little girl's gaze darted desperately between Philip and 16-year-old Denise Evans, who sat in the back row, tears silently rolling down her face. The courtroom erupted in hushed whispers. Mrs. Linda Thompson, the social worker who had orchestrated this seemingly perfect adoption, shuffled her papers nervously, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Judge Williams leaned forward, his experienced eyes studying the scene before him: the distraught child, the stunned prospective father, and the teenage girl whose presence had just derailed what should have been a routine proceeding. "Your Honor," Brittany continued, her voice barely a whisper now, "everyone says I'm lucky to have Mr. Mason want to adopt me. And he is kind and good." She paused, choking back sobs. "But Denise saved me when I first came to Hope Haven. She held me through nightmares, taught me to read, and promised we'd always be together. How can I be happy in a new home, knowing I left half my heart behind?" The profound silence that followed her words was broken only by the gentle sound of Denise's footsteps as she moved toward the front of the courtroom, drawn by an instinct to protect her little sister. Judge Williams raised his hand, halting her advance. Even as Philip Mason stood up, his face transformed by a realization that would alter the course of all their lives. "I believe," the judge announced, his voice grave, "we need to take a brief recess to reconsider what is truly in the best interest of this child." If this emotional opening touched your heart, join our storytelling family by subscribing. Every story we share is carefully crafted to remind us of love's power to overcome all barriers. Don't miss our next heartwarming tale of hope and triumph. Hope Haven Orphanage stood on the outskirts of Boston, a weathered Victorian building that had sheltered generations of children. Within its faded blue walls, an extraordinary bond between two unlikely sisters had blossomed over the past 3 years, defying age gaps and circumstances. Brittany Adams arrived at Hope Haven on a stormy night when she was just 4 years old, clutching nothing but a worn teddy bear and a photograph of a woman she could barely remember. Her first weeks were marked by nightmares and tears, her tiny frame curled into a defensive ball whenever anyone approached. The staff tried their best, but nothing seemed to breach the walls of trauma the young child had built around herself. That changed the day Denise Evans, then 13, heard Brittany's muffled sobs from the common room. While other teenagers avoided the difficult new arrival, Denise recognized something in those tears, an echo of her own past. She sat silently beside Brittany's hiding spot behind the bookshelf, humming a gentle lullaby her grandmother had once sung to her. Day after day she returned, sometimes reading stories, sometimes just being present, until gradually Brittany began to emerge from her shell. Their connection deepened through small moments, Denise teaching Brittany to tie her shoelaces, braiding her blonde hair each morning, helping her sound out difficult words in storybooks. When Brittany had nightmares, it was Denise's bed she sought out, not the night staff's office. The age gap that might have created distance instead formed a perfect balance, Denise's protective maturity complementing Brittany's innocent ability to find joy in simple things. The orphanage staff watched in amazement as both girls transformed through their relationship. Brittany's fear gave way to a bright, curious personality that could light up a room. Meanwhile, Denise, who had once been known for her stoic self-reliance, learned to open her heart again. They became inseparable, their daily routines intertwined like a choreographed dance breakfast shared over whispered secrets, homework sessions where Denise played teacher, evening walks in the orphanage garden where they imagined adventures and planned their future together. Their favorite spot was an old oak tree in the garden's corner, its branches creating a natural hideaway. Here they built their own world, complete with its own traditions. Every Sunday they held what they called their sister ceremony, sharing a cookie saved from lunch and making grand promises about their future together. "When I grow up," Brittany would declare, "I'm going to build us a house with a library bigger than the whole orphanage." Denise would smile, adding her own dreams to their shared vision. The staff came to rely on their unique dynamic. When new children arrived, particularly the most traumatized ones, Brittany and Denise worked as a team to help them adjust. Brittany's innocent approach would often get the first smile, while Denise's gentle guidance helped them find their place in the Hope Haven family. Their bond became a source of hope for other children, proving that family could be found in the most unexpected places. Even as potential adoptive parents began showing interest in Brittany, she remained fiercely loyal to her chosen sister. During home visits or meetings with families, she would inevitably turn the conversation to Denise, explaining proudly how her big sister had taught her to read or helped her overcome her fear of thunderstorms. Each time a family's interest waned upon realizing the depth of this attachment, Brittany seemed almost relieved, while Denise battled guilt over potentially holding her little sister back from a real family. Yet their bond continued to strengthen, built on countless small moments of trust and understanding. Whether sharing the last cookie from dinner, practicing dance routines in their room, or comforting each other through the hard days when memories of their past lives surfaced, they faced everything together. In a place where uncertainty was the only constant, they had created something rare and precious, a relationship that went beyond the traditional boundaries of family, founded on choice rather than chance, love rather than obligation. Before finding sanctuary at Hope Haven, Denise Evans's early life had been a dark chapter written in pain and betrayal. Born to alcoholic parents in a small Connecticut town, her childhood memories were a kaleidoscope of violence, neglect, and desperate attempts to become invisible within her own home. Her father, James Evans, a former factory worker turned chronic drunk, had a temper that exploded at the slightest provocation. Her mother, Sarah, rather than protecting her daughter, retreated into prescription drug abuse, leaving 8-year-old Denise to navigate the treacherous waters of their household alone. The little girl learned early to read the signs of impending storms, the sound of beer cans being crushed, the slur in her father's voice, the vacant look in her mother's eyes. The breaking point came during a bitter winter night when Denise was 10. Her father, enraged by a lost job and too many drinks, turned his fury on both wife and daughter. That night, neighbors finally called the police after hearing screams and breaking glass. They found Denise huddled in her closet, clutching her schoolbooks, the only escape she had ever known. Her mother lay unconscious in the kitchen, while her father ranted incoherently in the front yard. The system that was supposed to protect her instead subjected her to a different kind of trauma. Bounced between 3 foster homes in 2 years, Denise learned that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. The first home seemed perfect until the foster father's lingering looks made her skin crawl. The second family returned her after 3 months, claiming she was too difficult because she refused to call them mom and dad. The third placement ended when the family's biological children began bullying her, and the parents looked the other way. At Hope Haven, 13-year-old Denise arrived with walls built so high that even the most experienced staff members struggled to reach her. She excelled academically, keeping her head buried in books, but refused to participate in group activities or form connections with other children. Her file was marked with notes about her being withdrawn, overly mature for her age, and resistant to emotional attachment. The only person who seemed to understand her was Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell, the elderly librarian who recognized a fellow book lover. Through their shared passion for literature, Eleanor gradually earned Denise's trust. During quiet afternoons in the library, she would gently encourage Denise to talk about her feelings, using stories as bridges to difficult conversations. It was Eleanor who first noticed how Denise's hands would shake when adult men raised their voices, how she hoarded food in her room, how she positioned herself to always face the door. With infinite patience, Eleanor helped Denise begin the long journey of healing, teaching her that not all adults would hurt her, that her past didn't have to define her future. But the deepest wounds remained hidden: the belief that she was fundamentally unlovable, that anyone who claimed to care would eventually leave. These beliefs manifested in subtle ways: her refusal to participate in adoption events, her tendency to push away potential friends before they could reject her, her obsessive need to be perfect in school, as if academic excellence could somehow make up for her perceived unworthiness. Then came Brittany, a tiny whirlwind of need and fear that broke through every barrier Denise had built. In helping the younger girl heal, Denise found her own path to recovery. Brittany's unconditional love and trust became a mirror, showing Denise a different reflection of herself, not as the broken, unwanted child of her past, but as someone capable of giving and receiving love. Yet even as she flourished in her role as Brittany's protector, Denise carried deep-seated fears. Every time a potential family showed interest in Brittany, every time there was talk of adoption, the old terror of abandonment would resurface. She knew that at 16, her own chances of adoption were virtually non-existent, but the thought of losing Brittany to a real family awakened all her childhood demons. These fears would soon collide with events that would test every lesson she had learned about love, trust, and the true meaning of family. Philip Mason's life was defined by a single moment 3 years ago, the day he lost his 8-year-old daughter Sarah in a devastating car accident. Once a vibrant, successful business executive known for his ambitious projects and corporate achievements, he became a shadow of himself, haunted by the empty halls of his expansive Boston mansion. Sarah had been his world, the light that gave meaning to his long hours at the office and his driven pursuit of success. Born late in his life after years of fertility treatments with his late wife Emma, who passed during childbirth, Sarah was the miracle he never thought he'd have. Her infectious laugh, her passion for painting, and her habit of leaving sticky notes with drawn hearts around his office made every day brighter. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Philip had promised to pick Sarah up from her art class but got caught in an important business meeting. He called his regular driver to get her instead. 10 minutes later, a drunk driver ran a red light, and in an instant his entire world shattered. The guilt of not being there, of prioritizing work over his daughter, became a weight he carried every day. After Sarah's death, Philip threw himself into work with a desperate intensity, as if building bigger buildings and closing larger deals could somehow fill the void she left behind. His home office remained exactly as it was the day she died, her artwork still pinned to the walls, her last note, "Love you, Daddy," still stuck to his computer monitor. The room became both a shrine and a reminder of his failure as a father. His transformation wasn't just internal. The once gregarious businessman became known for his solitude. Board members whispered about his sudden need to visit children's hospitals, his generous donations to youth art programs, his quiet visits to playgrounds where he would sit and watch families for hours. Some suggested he needed therapy, others wondered if he would ever recover. The turning point came during a charity event at Hope Haven Orphanage. Philip had been invited as a potential donor, expected to write a check and make a polite appearance. Instead, he found himself drawn to the children's art display in the main hall. Among the drawings, he spotted one that could have been Sarah's, the same bold colors, the same joyful style. The artist was a 7-year-old girl named Brittany. For the first time in 3 years, Philip felt something stir in his heart. Not just the familiar pain of loss, but a flicker of hope. In Brittany's artwork he saw not just echoes of Sarah, but the possibility of healing, of giving another child the love he still had to offer. Yet his initial interest in adoption wasn't entirely pure. There was a part of him that saw Brittany as a chance to recapture what he had lost with Sarah. What Philip didn't expect was how this decision would force him to confront his own unresolved grief and question his motivations. The journey ahead would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the true meaning of family. It would require him to open his heart not just to one child, but to the possibility that healing comes in unexpected forms, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to love again, even when that love looks different from what we initially imagined. His mansion, once a mausoleum of memories, stood ready for new life. But first, Philip would have to learn that replacing what was lost was not the same as healing, and that sometimes the family we need is not the one we initially set out to create. The autumn morning when Philip Mason first visited Hope Haven Orphanage started like any other. Children rushed through breakfast, staff members reviewed schedules, and Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell arranged her library books with methodical precision. Nobody suspected that this ordinary Tuesday would set in motion events that would challenge their understanding of family and love. Philip arrived precisely at 9 a.m., his tailored suit and polished shoes marking him as different from their usual visitors. Linda Thompson, the lead social worker, greeted him with practiced enthusiasm, already mentally calculating the donation potential of this wealthy businessman. But Philip's demeanor surprised her. Instead of the usual rushed inspection wealthy donors preferred, he asked to spend time observing the children in their natural routines. In the main playroom, chaos reigned, as it always did during free time. Younger children chased each other with toy cars, while older ones huddled over board games or books. Philip stood quietly at the edge, his eyes scanning the scene with an intensity that made some staff members uncomfortable. Then he spotted her, a small blonde girl sitting cross-legged by the window, intensely focused on her drawing. Brittany didn't notice Philip's approach, too absorbed in her artwork. She was creating a colorful scene of two girls holding hands beneath a rainbow, her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration. The similarity to Sarah's artistic style struck Philip like a physical blow. The same bold color choices, the same joyful energy radiating from the page. He had to take a moment to steady himself against the wall. "That's a beautiful drawing," he finally said, his voice slightly hoarse. Brittany looked up, startled but not afraid. Her blue eyes met his with a directness that reminded him painfully of his daughter. "Thank you," she replied, then added with the unfiltered honesty of childhood, "You look sad. Would you like to draw too? Drawing helps when I'm sad." The simple offer cracked something in Philip's carefully maintained facade. He found himself sitting on the floor beside her, accepting a slightly crushed crayon. As they drew together, Brittany chatted about her art, her favorite colors, and her dreams of becoming an artist someday. Each word, each gesture seemed to echo Sarah in ways that both hurt and healed. From across the room, Denise watched the interaction with growing concern. She had seen this before, wealthy visitors becoming enchanted with Brittany's charm, seeing only the sweet, artistic child without understanding the depth of her needs or the importance of her existing bonds. Denise's hands clenched involuntarily as she observed Philip's obvious emotional response to her sister. As the morning progressed, Philip learned more about Brittany through careful questions to the staff. Her background, her progress at the orphanage, her special bond with Denise. Linda Thompson, sensing his interest, emphasized Brittany's artistic talents and sweet nature while glossing over what she considered complications, particularly her attachment to the teenage resident. During lunch, Philip watched as Brittany automatically saved half her dessert and carried it to Denise, the two girls sharing a private smile that spoke of countless similar moments. He saw how Denise gently wiped a smudge of chocolate from Brittany's cheek, how their interaction flowed with the natural rhythm of long-established trust. Before leaving, Philip requested a private meeting with Mrs. Thompson. In her office, surrounded by filing cabinets containing the stories of countless children, he made his intention clear. "I'm interested in providing a home for Brittany," he stated, his voice firm despite the emotion evident in his eyes. What would the process entail? Linda Thompson's professional smile couldn't quite hide her excitement. A wealthy, single father with obvious emotional investment was a rare opportunity. She pulled out the necessary forms, eager to begin the process before Philip could change his mind. As she detailed the steps: background checks, home studies, supervised visits, she deliberately minimized mentions of Denise, treating the girl's attachment as a minor obstacle to be overcome. As Philip left Hope Haven that afternoon, his mind was already filling with possibilities. He envisioned Brittany in Sarah's old playroom, bringing life back to the silent halls of his mansion. Yet something nagged at him: the image of Denise's watchful eyes, the protective way she hovered near Brittany, the unspoken challenge in her stance. Unknown to him, as his car pulled away from the orphanage, two girls sat in their secret spot beneath the old oak tree. Denise held Brittany close as the younger girl whispered her confused excitement about the nice man who liked her art. Neither could have imagined how this single visit would soon test the bounds of their sisterly bond, forcing everyone involved to question their assumptions about love, family, and belonging. Over the next few weeks, Philip's visits to Hope Haven became increasingly frequent. Each time he arrived, his expensive car would cause a stir among the children, but his attention remained solely fixed on Brittany. He brought her art supplies: professional-grade colored pencils, sketch pads, and watercolors that made her eyes light up with wonder. Yet behind each gift lay an unspoken shadow, a comparison to another little girl who once delighted in similar presents. During these visits, Philip carefully orchestrated one-on-one time with Brittany, often in the art room where they would spend hours drawing together. He found himself opening up about Sarah for the first time in years, sharing stories about her love for painting and her dream of becoming an artist. Brittany listened with rapt attention, her own artistic enthusiasm mirroring his lost daughter's in ways that both comforted and haunted him. Meanwhile, Denise watched from the sidelines, her concern growing with each passing day. She noticed how Philip's eyes would glaze over slightly when Brittany mentioned her name, how he would subtly redirect conversations away from any mention of their sisterly bond. During group activities, he positioned himself between the girls, creating a physical barrier that felt increasingly intentional. Linda Thompson encouraged this selective attention, scheduling Philip's visits during times when Denise was occupied with her studies or chores. In their private meetings, she emphasized Brittany's need for a fresh start, and suggested that her attachment to Denise, while sweet, might hinder her ability to fully bond with a new family. One afternoon, during an art session, Brittany created a family portrait that included herself, Philip, and Denise. When she proudly showed it to Philip, his reaction was subtle but telling. His smile tightened slightly, and he gently suggested drawing another version, this time focusing on just the two of them. Brittany's confusion was painful to witness, her small hands clutching both drawings as she tried to understand why she couldn't have both versions of her family. The situation came to a head during a group dinner where Philip was invited to observe Brittany in a more natural setting. Throughout the meal, Brittany constantly turned to Denise for reassurance, sharing inside jokes and seeking her approval. Philip's frustration became increasingly evident in his rigid posture and forced smiles. After dinner, he requested a private conversation with Mrs. Thompson. "I understand that Denise has been important in Brittany's life," he began diplomatically, "but for a successful adoption, don't you think we need to help Brittany develop more independence, to form new attachments?" Linda Thompson seized this opening, producing reports and studies about the importance of clean breaks in adoption cases. She painted Denise's influence as potentially problematic, suggesting that her age and background might not provide the best role model for Brittany's development. That evening, new rules were quietly implemented. Denise found herself assigned to different activity groups than Brittany. Their shared mealtimes were reduced, and their beloved evening reading sessions were interrupted by various tasks and responsibilities. The systematic separation was subtle but relentless. Denise confronted Mrs. Thompson about these changes, her voice trembling with barely controlled emotion. "You're trying to make Brittany forget me," she accused. "But you don't understand, we need each other." The social worker's response was professionally cold. "Denise, you're old enough to understand. This is about Brittany's future. Don't you want what's best for her?" These words haunted Denise as she lay awake that night, listening to Brittany's muffled sniffles from across the room. The younger girl had been told she couldn't sleep in Denise's bed anymore, another new rule. The physical distance of mere feet felt like miles, a preview of the greater separation looming on the horizon. Philip remained oblivious to the emotional toll his focused attention was taking. He saw only what he wanted to see: a little girl who reminded him of his lost daughter, a chance to rebuild the family he had lost. When Brittany's artwork began to show darker themes, figures standing apart, rain clouds over separated people, he attributed it to the natural anxiety of transition rather than the pain of forced separation from her sister. As autumn deepened into winter, the pattern continued. Philip's visits increased in frequency, while Denise's time with Brittany decreased proportionally. The orphanage staff, following Mrs. Thompson's lead, began treating the eventual separation as inevitable, speaking to Brittany about her new life and to Denise about letting go. Yet beneath this orchestrated separation, the bond between the sisters remained unshaken. They found ways to communicate through notes hidden in library books, through quick hugs in passing, through silent glances that carried the weight of their shared love and fear. Neither Philip nor the staff realized that their efforts to break this connection were only strengthening the girls' determination to remain sisters, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The day Brittany left for her trial stay at Philip's mansion was wrapped in a heavy December fog that seemed to mirror the emotional haze surrounding the departure. Her small suitcase contained carefully chosen outfits, her art supplies, and hidden beneath her sweaters a photo of herself and Denise that she had refused to leave behind. Philip's home, a sprawling Victorian mansion in Boston's prestigious Beacon Hill neighborhood, should have been every child's dream. The room he had prepared for Brittany was a masterpiece of childhood fantasy, walls painted in soft pastels, a canopy bed with silk curtains, and an art studio corner complete with an easel and natural lighting. Yet as Brittany stood in the doorway, clutching her suitcase, the grandeur felt overwhelming rather than welcoming. The first few days followed a carefully planned schedule. Philip had taken time off work, determined to make the transition smooth. They spent mornings in the art studio, afternoons exploring the mansion's extensive gardens, and evenings watching movies in the home theater. Each activity was meticulously designed to create new memories, to help Brittany envision this as her forever home. But the silence in the massive house was deafening. Brittany found herself speaking in whispers, her footsteps echoing in halls that seemed to stretch endlessly. At night, the unfamiliar shadows and creaks of the old mansion sent her heart racing, but she had no Denise to crawl into bed with, no comforting arms to chase away the fears. During meals in the formal dining room, Brittany would unconsciously save portions of her dessert, only to remember there was no one to share them with. She caught herself turning to make comments to a sister who wasn't there, the empty space beside her a constant reminder of what was missing. Philip noticed her struggle but interpreted it through the lens of his own past. When he found Brittany crying in the garden, he assumed she was processing the transition and offered her new art supplies to lift her spirits. When she grew quiet during their activities, he filled the silence with stories about Sarah, not realizing that each tale only highlighted the absence of the person Brittany really wanted to talk to. One evening, while Philip was on an urgent business call, Brittany explored Sarah's old playroom. The space was preserved like a museum, filled with toys and books that hadn't been touched in years. Among Sarah's belongings, she found a diary filled with entries about wanting a sister. The irony of the situation, being chosen to fill the role of a lost daughter while being separated from her own sister, wasn't lost on her young mind. The breaking point came during an art therapy session arranged by Mrs. Thompson, who visited regularly to monitor the placement. Brittany was asked to draw her new family. She created a beautiful picture, but broke down crying when asked to explain why there was a shadowy figure in the background. "That's Denise," she sobbed. "She's always there, even when you can't see her." At night, Brittany would sneak to the mansion's phone, trying to call the orphanage to speak to Denise, only to find the line secured with a code. She began hiding pieces of her artwork drawings of two girls holding hands, of shared hearts, of the oak tree at Hope Haven under her mattress, afraid they would be seen as resistance to her fresh start. Philip's well-meaning attempts to create new traditions only emphasized the loss of old ones. When he suggested they have a special Sunday breakfast ritual, Brittany couldn't help but think of the sister ceremonies she and Denise used to share. Each new experience was tainted by the absence of the person she longed to share it with. As the trial period progressed, Brittany developed a quiet resilience. She learned to smile at appropriate times, to express gratitude for Philip's generosity, to participate in the activities planned for her. But those who looked closely could see the light in her eyes dimming, her artwork becoming more muted, her laughter less frequent. Mrs. Thompson reported the trial period as progressing satisfactorily, noting Brittany's compliance and Philip's dedication. She deliberately overlooked the signs of emotional distress, focusing instead on the material advantages and opportunities this placement offered. Her reports back to Hope Haven painted a picture of successful adjustment, even as Brittany's hidden drawings told a different story. The magnificent mansion, with all its luxury and promise, had become a gilded cage. Each passing day reinforced what Brittany already knew in her heart, that no amount of material comfort could compensate for the loss of the emotional shelter she had found in her sister's love. As the trial period drew to a close, the question wasn't whether she could adapt to this new life, but whether she could survive being only half of who she truly was. Rachel Thompson sat in her sterile office at the Department of Child Services, methodically reviewing Denise Evans's file with a practiced eye that seemed to search for flaws rather than potential. 20 years in the system had left her with deeply entrenched beliefs about older children in foster care, and Denise's case particularly troubled her. "Another troubled teenager," she muttered, highlighting passages about Denise's early trauma and defense mechanisms. Her bias wasn't just professional, it was personal. 15 years ago, Rachel had attempted to adopt a teenage girl, only to have the placement end catastrophically, when the child's unresolved trauma led to destructive behavior. That experience had hardened her heart against older adoptees. The Brittany Phillip adoption case should have been straightforward: a wealthy, caring man offering a stable home to a young, adaptable child. Instead, it had become complicated by what Rachel viewed as an unhealthy attachment between the girls. Her reports began to reflect this perspective, subtly at first, then with increasing conviction. Subject demonstrates concerning codependent behaviors, she wrote in one assessment. Relationship with younger resident shows signs of inappropriate emotional dependence. Each observation was carefully worded to raise red flags while maintaining a veneer of professional objectivity. Rachel systematically built a case against Denise's influence, transforming natural sisterly affection into something that seemed almost sinister. During her weekly visits to Hope Haven, Rachel began documenting every interaction between the girls with a critical eye. When Denise helped Brittany with homework, it became academic over-reliance. When they shared private jokes, it was exclusionary behavior patterns. Even their tender moments were reframed as evidence of isolation from peer relationships. Her campaign extended beyond paperwork. In meetings with other staff members, Rachel would drop carefully crafted comments about the dangers of trauma bonding and the importance of fresh starts in adoption cases. She scheduled private sessions with Brittany, asking leading questions designed to expose any negative influence from Denise. The turning point came when she discovered Denise's hidden past, a brief incident at her second foster home where she'd lashed out during a panic attack. Rachel seized upon this information like a prosecutor presenting evidence, conveniently overlooking the context of Denise's trauma and subsequent years of growth and stability. Her crusade became more overt when she learned that Philip Mason was considering maintaining contact between the girls after the adoption. She arranged an urgent meeting with him, armed with carefully selected case studies and statistics about failed adoptions involving continued connections to foster siblings. "Mr. Mason," she began, her voice carrying the weight of assumed authority, "I understand your desire to ease Brittany's transition, but maintaining ties with Denise could seriously jeopardize the attachment process. These kinds of relationships often become toxic as children age." Even Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell, the librarian who had known both girls for years, found her attempts to defend their relationship dismissed. "With all due respect, Mrs. Mitchell," Rachel would say, her tone condescending, "your emotional attachment to these children may be clouding your professional judgment." Rachel's influence began to spread through the system like poison. Other social workers, trusting her experience, began to view the situation through her distorted lens. The narrative shifted. What had once been seen as a beautiful example of siblings supporting each other became a case study in problematic attachments. She took particular satisfaction in noting how her interventions were affecting Denise. The teenager's increasing frustration and desperate attempts to maintain contact with Brittany were documented as evidence of instability rather than natural reactions to forced separation from a loved one. When Denise finally confronted her, demanding to know why she was trying to destroy their relationship, Rachel saw only confirmation of her beliefs, this emotional volatility. She wrote in her report that evening demonstrates exactly why maintaining contact would be detrimental to Brittany's development. Her recommendations became increasingly extreme. She suggested limiting the girls' contact during Brittany's remaining time at Hope Haven, monitoring their interactions, and eventually implementing a complete separation once the adoption was finalized. Each suggestion was wrapped in professional jargon and supported by carefully chosen research. The impact of Rachel's prejudice rippled through both girls' lives. Denise found herself under constant scrutiny, her every action questioned and documented. Brittany, sensing the tension but too young to understand its source, began to withdraw, her natural joy dimming under the weight of adult complications she couldn't comprehend. Yet Rachel remained convinced of her righteousness, viewing herself as the guardian of proper adoption procedures. Her own past pain had created a blind spot, so vast she couldn't see the damage she was inflicting in the name of protection. As she filed yet another negative report about Denise's influence, she failed to recognize that her own trauma was driving her to potentially create the very kind of emotional wounds she claimed to be preventing. Little did she know that her actions were about to set in motion a chain of events that would not only challenge her deepest held beliefs, but also force everyone involved to confront difficult truths about love, healing, and the true meaning of family. The fabrication of false evidence against Denise began subtly, like cracks spreading through a foundation. Rachel Thompson sat at her desk late one evening, carefully crafting a report that would forever alter the course of two sisters' lives. Her computer screen glowed with half-truths and manipulated observations, each word chosen to paint a picture of dysfunction where none existed. "Observed subject DE exhibiting controlling behaviors during mealtimes," she wrote, transforming Denise's loving habit of saving treats for Brittany into something sinister. "Subject appears to be using food sharing as a means of maintaining psychological control over younger resident BA." The reality, a simple act of sisterly love, was twisted into a weapon against their bond. Rachel's reports grew bolder with each submission. She began documenting incidents that never occurred, arguments that never happened, manipulation that existed only in her imagination. One particularly damaging report claimed Denise had deliberately sabotaged Brittany's relationships with potential adoptive families before Philip, a complete fabrication that nonetheless found its way into official records. During supervised visits between the girls, Rachel would scrutinize their every interaction, interpreting innocent gestures through a lens of suspicion. When Denise helped Brittany tie her shoelaces, it became fostering unnecessary dependence. Their private jokes were labeled as exclusionary behavior designed to isolate BA from peers and potential adoptive resources. The most damaging allegations centered around Denise's past trauma. Rachel expertly wove together isolated incidents from Denise's early years in the system, creating a narrative that suggested she was emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous. A panic attack from 6 years ago became violent tendencies, while her protective instincts toward Brittany were reframed as obsessive attachment disorder. These reports began circulating through the child welfare system, gaining momentum and credibility with each passing hand. Social workers who had known and trusted Denise for years found themselves questioning their judgments. Even Hope Haven staff members began treating her differently, watching her interactions with Brittany more closely, their trust eroded by Rachel's carefully constructed lies. Philip Mason received carefully selected excerpts from these reports, presented during his meetings with Rachel. "Mr. Mason," she would say, her voice filled with manufactured concern, "I feel obligated to share some troubling patterns we've observed." She would then present her evidence, each point designed to make him question the wisdom of maintaining any connection between the girls after adoption. The impact on Denise was devastating. She began noticing the changed attitudes, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the way other staff members no longer left her alone with younger children. Her confusion turned to hurt, then to anger as she realized her reputation was being systematically destroyed. Brittany, too young to understand the adult machinations around her, nevertheless felt their effects. She noticed how adults would tense up when she and Denise were together, how their precious moments were increasingly interrupted by staff members citing various rules and regulations. Their once natural relationship began to feel scrutinized and heavy with unspoken tensions. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell attempted to challenge these reports, presenting her own observations of the girls' positive relationship. However, her protests were dismissed as emotionally biased and lacking professional distance. Her decades of experience working with children were deemed irrelevant in the face of Rachel's supposedly scientific documentation. The false reports reached their crescendo when Rachel submitted a comprehensive evaluation recommending immediate separation. She cited escalating concerns about psychological manipulation and potential long-term emotional damage to B.A.'s development. The report was a masterwork of deception, weaving together actual events, misinterpreted interactions, and complete fabrications into a compelling narrative of danger. This report landed on the desk of Judge Robert Williams, who would eventually preside over Brittany's adoption hearing. Rachel knew that planting these seeds of doubt early would influence the final outcome. She included phrases like professional consensus and established patterns of behavior, lending false authority to her personal vendetta. Other children at Hope Haven, picking up on the adults' changed attitudes, began to distance themselves from Denise. The isolation only served to reinforce Rachel's narrative about her supposed instability. Each tear of frustration, each moment of righteous anger, became another piece of evidence in the case against her. Meanwhile, Denise struggled to defend herself against accusations she couldn't even fully access. Her attempts to explain or justify her actions only seemed to dig her deeper into the hole Rachel had created. The more she protested, the more she appeared to confirm Rachel's assessments of her as emotionally volatile and resistant to authority. The systematic destruction of Denise's reputation culminated in a recommendation that would shock even those who had begun to believe Rachel's lies, a suggestion that Denise be transferred to a different facility for the emotional well-being of all parties involved. This recommendation, built on a foundation of falsehoods, would set in motion events that would test not only the bond between two sisters, but also the very system meant to protect them. The transfer order arrived on a cold Wednesday morning, its official letterhead bearing the weight of bureaucratic finality. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell's hands trembled as she read the document, which stated that Denise Evans would be relocated to Riverside Youth Center, a facility over 50 miles away, in the best interest of all parties involved. The news spread through Hope Haven like wildfire, leaving shock and disbelief in its wake. Staff members who had watched Denise grow from a traumatized child into a responsible young woman struggled to comprehend how this could be happening. Rachel Thompson, however, stood in the background with barely concealed satisfaction, her master plan reaching its culmination. The transfer will take place next Monday, Rachel announced during an emergency staff meeting. We believe a clean break will be best for everyone, especially Brittany. Her words fell like stones in the silent room, where even those who had begun to believe her reports about Denise found this final step hard to accept. Denise received the news with an eerie calm that worried Eleanor more than any outburst would have. "They're really going to send me away?" she asked, her voice steady, but her hands clenched so tight her knuckles turned white. "Just like that, they can erase 4 years of my life here." The Riverside Youth Center had a reputation that made the situation even more concerning. Unlike Hope Haven's nurturing environment, Riverside was known for its strict institutional approach. It was a place where troubled teens were sent to be reformed, not a home where they could heal and grow. Philip Mason, visiting Brittany that afternoon, found the orphanage in turmoil. Children whispered in corners, staff members moved about with forced professionalism, and an atmosphere of impending loss hung heavy in the air. When he asked about the commotion, Rachel smoothly intercepted, presenting the transfer as a positive development for all involved. "Think of it as a fresh start," she explained, her voice honey-sweet with false concern. "Denise will have new opportunities at Riverside, and Brittany can fully embrace her future with you without complications." She carefully omitted mentioning Riverside's reputation or the real distance that would make any future contact between the sisters virtually impossible. That night, Brittany crept into Denise's bed, just as she had done countless times before when seeking comfort from nightmares. But this time, both girls knew they were living a nightmare from which they couldn't wake up. "They can't send you away," Brittany whispered fiercely. "You're my sister. They can't just break up a family." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. A system designed to create families was working overtime to destroy one that had formed naturally. Eleanor Mitchell, unable to sleep, spent the night reviewing every document, searching for any legal means to prevent the transfer. She found herself running into bureaucratic walls at every turn, each seemingly built by Rachel's meticulous groundwork. As the dreaded Monday approached, Hope Haven witnessed a quiet revolution. Other children began leaving notes of support in Denise's belongings. Staff members who had known her longest wrote letters of recommendation, trying to ensure she would at least have evidence of her true character at her new placement. Even the night janitor, Mr. Jenkins, who had often found Denise reading to Brittany long after bedtime, joined the silent protest by accidentally misplacing some of the transfer paperwork. Yet Rachel Thompson remained unmoved. When she caught wind of the staff's attempts to delay the transfer, she brought in higher authorities, threatening disciplinary action against anyone who interfered with the process. Her victory seemed assured, backed by the full weight of a system she had manipulated to serve her prejudices. The weekend before the scheduled transfer became a time of quiet desperation. Denise and Brittany spent every possible moment together, trying to memorize each other's faces, voices, and mannerisms. They made promises they knew would be almost impossible to keep, created secret codes for letters they might never be allowed to send, and held on to each other as if their embrace alone could prevent the impending separation. As Sunday night fell, Hope Haven held its breath. In her office, Rachel Thompson completed the final paperwork with methodical precision, satisfied that her plan to protect Brittany was nearly complete. Yet she failed to notice the stirring of resistance that was building throughout the orphanage, a resistance that would soon challenge not only her authority, but the very assumptions upon which she had built her case against Denise. The morning after learning about Denise's impending transfer, Brittany refused to touch her breakfast. Her untouched bowl of oatmeal sat cooling on the table, a silent protest that would soon escalate into something far more serious. "I won't eat until they let Denise stay," she declared, her small voice carrying a determination that surprised even the most seasoned staff members. Days passed, and Brittany's hunger strike continued. She would sit at meals, hands folded in her lap, watching as others ate around her. The only things she would accept were water, and occasionally small sips of juice when the medical staff insisted. Her usual vibrant energy dimmed, replaced by a ghostly pallor that grew more concerning with each passing day. Philip Mason, arriving for his scheduled visit, found a very different child than the one he had begun to know. Brittany's artistic corner in her room lay untouched, colored pencils gathering dust. Her newest sketchbook remained blank, a physical manifestation of her fading spirit. When he tried to engage her in their usual drawing sessions, she simply shook her head, her once bright blue eyes now dull with exhaustion and determination. "Please, Brittany," he pleaded, "you need to eat. You're making yourself sick," but his words fell on deaf ears. Brittany had learned from Denise that sometimes silence was the strongest protest, and she wielded that lesson with devastating effectiveness. Her quiet resistance spoke volumes about the depth of her love for her sister and her willingness to fight for their bond. The medical staff at Hope Haven began raising serious concerns by the 5th day. Brittany's blood sugar levels were dropping dangerously low, and her small frame couldn't afford to lose more weight. They spoke in hushed tones about the possibility of forced feeding, a prospect that horrified everyone who knew the trauma it could cause. Rachel Thompson attempted to use the situation to her advantage, documenting Brittany's behavior as evidence of Denise's harmful influence and manipulation, but her arguments began to ring hollow as staff members witnessed Brittany's independent determination. This wasn't a child being manipulated, this was a sister fighting for her family with the only weapon she had. The physical effects of the hunger strike became increasingly apparent. Brittany's once boundless energy disappeared, replaced by long periods of listlessness. She spent hours curled up in corners, clutching her worn sketchbook like a shield. Dark circles appeared under her eyes, and her clothes began to hang loose on her frame. Staff members tried everything to convince her to eat. They prepared her favorite meals, brought in special treats, even arranged for a child psychologist to speak with her. But Brittany remained resolute. "Denise is my sister," she would say whenever anyone tried to reason with her. "If she goes away, part of me goes too. How can I eat when half of me is missing?" The other children at Hope Haven watched with a mixture of awe and fear as Brittany's protest continued. Some tried to sneak her food, worried about their friend's health, but she gently refused their offerings. Her resolve began to inspire a quiet rebellion among the other residents, who started their own forms of protest, refusing to participate in activities, writing letters to the administration, creating art pieces depicting the sisters together. Eleanor Mitchell, watching Brittany's decline with growing alarm, documented everything meticulously. She knew that sometimes the most powerful evidence comes not from official reports but from the raw truth of a child's actions. Each day she photographed Brittany's untouched meals, recorded her weight loss, and noted the increasing desperation in her behavior. By the end of the first week, Brittany's condition had deteriorated significantly. During art therapy, instead of creating her usual colorful pieces, she could only manage weak pencil sketches, all of them showing two figures being torn apart. Her teachers reported that she could barely concentrate in class, often staring blankly out windows or falling asleep at her desk. The breaking point came when Brittany fainted during a routine fire drill. The sound of her small body hitting the floor echoed through the hallway, bringing everyone's worst fears into sharp focus. As the medical staff rushed to her aid, Denise broke ranks and ran to her sister, cradling Brittany's head in her lap and sobbing apologies for not being able to protect her. Philip Mason, called to the orphanage during this crisis, arrived to find both girls in the infirmary. The sight of Brittany, pale and weak in the hospital bed, with Denise holding her hand and whispering encouragement, forced him to confront the reality of their bond. This was no simple attachment that could be smoothed over with time and distance. This was a vital connection that, when threatened, could drive a child to such desperate measures. The medical staff insisted on intravenous fluids to stabilize Brittany's condition, but even in her weakened state, she maintained her protest. "I won't eat until they promise," she whispered, her voice barely audible but her determination unbroken. "Promise they won't send Denise away." The situation had escalated beyond anyone's expectations, transforming from a simple disciplinary matter into a crisis that threatened a child's life. Rachel Thompson's carefully constructed plans began to crumble as medical professionals, staff members, and even Philip himself were forced to recognize the depth of the bond they had tried to dismiss. As Brittany lay in the infirmary, her silent protest spoke louder than any words could. Her willingness to risk her own health to keep her sister had demonstrated a love so pure and powerful that it challenged everyone's assumptions about family, belonging, and the true meaning of sisterhood. Philip Mason sat in his home office late into the night, surrounded by copies of Rachel Thompson's reports, his business instincts awakened by inconsistencies he couldn't ignore. The sight of Brittany in the hospital bed had shaken him to his core, forcing him to question everything he thought he knew about the adoption process. "Something isn't right here," he muttered, comparing dates and testimonies. His years of corporate experience had taught him to recognize patterns in documentation, and Rachel's reports showed clear signs of manipulation. Incidents were dated when Denise had been documented elsewhere. Behavioral assessments contradicted years of positive evaluations, and witness statements seemed suspiciously uniform in their language. Determined to uncover the truth, Philip began reaching out to his network. He hired private investigators to look into Rachel's professional history, contacted other orphanages where she had worked, and began interviewing Hope Haven staff members away from the facility. Each conversation revealed new layers of deception. A breakthrough came when he discovered Rachel's personal connection to a failed teenage adoption 15 years ago. The investigator's report detailed how that experience had left her deeply biased against older child adoptions, influencing her professional judgment in ways that violated ethical standards. Eleanor Mitchell proved to be an invaluable ally in the investigation. During a clandestine meeting at a small cafe, she provided Philip with years of documentation about Denise and Brittany's relationship. "These are the real reports," she said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Reports that Rachel conveniently omitted or altered in her assessments. The evidence was damning. Where Rachel had documented controlling behavior, Eleanor's notes showed countless instances of selfless support. Claims of manipulation were contradicted by clear evidence of healthy, mutual emotional growth. Most disturbing were the direct alterations of incident reports, where Rachel had changed dates and details to support her narrative. Philip's investigation extended to Riverside Youth Center, the facility where Rachel planned to transfer Denise. What he discovered chilled him: a pattern of using transfers to separate siblings, always justified with carefully worded psychological assessments. Several former residents had similar stories of being separated from younger siblings during adoption processes. Working late into the nights, Philip began building a comprehensive case. He created timelines, cross-referenced documents, and gathered statements from other professionals who had worked with the girls. The picture that emerged was clear: a systematic campaign to destroy a legitimate and healthy sibling bond. A conversation with Hope Haven's night janitor, Mr. Jenkins, revealed more. "Miss Denise? She's the one who stays up reading to the little ones when they have nightmares," he shared. And Brittany. That child was terrified of the dark until Denise helped her through it. Now they help other scared kids together. That's not manipulation, sir. That's family. Philip's corporate training in detecting fraud proved unexpectedly useful. He noticed patterns in Rachel's language that suggested predetermined conclusions rather than objective observation. Reports were structured to build a specific narrative, with contradicting evidence consistently omitted or reframed. During his investigation, Philip found himself confronting his own motivations. Had he been so focused on recreating his lost family that he'd willingly accepted Rachel's distorted version of events? The realization was uncomfortable but necessary. One particularly disturbing discovery was a pattern of similar separations in Rachel's past cases. Other sibling groups had been divided using nearly identical justifications, always wrapped in professional language about healthy attachments and fresh starts. The long-term impacts on these children had never been followed up. As Philip dug deeper, he uncovered communications between Rachel and certain adoption agencies that suggested a broader systemic issue. Older children were being systematically separated from younger siblings to make the younger ones more adoptable. All justified with carefully crafted psychological assessments. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Philip discovered Rachel had suppressed positive reports from other professionals. Evaluations from teachers, counselors, and medical professionals that supported the healthy nature of the girls' relationship had been deliberately excluded from official files. Philip brought his findings to Judge Williams in a private meeting. "Your Honor," he began, spreading the evidence across the judge's desk, "I believe we have a serious case of professional misconduct that has nearly destroyed 2 young lives." The judge's expression grew increasingly grave as he reviewed the documents. The scope of Rachel's deception became clear when Philip compared her reports with security footage from Hope Haven. Incidents she claimed to have witnessed couldn't have occurred as described, as camera footage showed the girls elsewhere at those times. Eleanor provided additional context through years of journal entries she had kept about the children in her care. Her detailed observations of Denise and Brittany's relationship development stood in stark contrast to Rachel's allegations of manipulation and control. Most compelling were the testimonies Philip gathered from other children at Hope Haven. Their stories painted a picture of 2 sisters who not only supported each other but helped create a more nurturing environment for everyone in the orphanage. As his investigation neared completion, Philip realized he hadn't just uncovered professional misconduct, he had documented the systematic destruction of a family bond by someone whose past trauma had corrupted their judgment. The evidence would not only challenge Rachel's recommendations but potentially change how sibling relationships were evaluated in the adoption system. Armed with this comprehensive evidence, Philip prepared to challenge not just Rachel's immediate decisions, but the broader system that had allowed such bias to influence the lives of vulnerable children. His investigation had revealed not just one wrong to be righted, but a pattern that needed to be exposed and addressed. As Philip's investigation deepened, a disturbing pattern emerged through a series of heart-wrenching discoveries. Eleanor Mitchell's network of former colleagues began sharing similar stories, tales of siblings separated through manipulated reports and rushed transfers. Each case bore Rachel Thompson's distinctive fingerprints, masked by professional jargon and psychological terminology. The first case they uncovered involved the Mitchell siblings, James and Emma, separated 3 years ago. James, then 15, had been transferred to a facility in another state just weeks before his 12-year-old sister's adoption was finalized. The justification in Rachel's report mirrored her current claims about Denise's unhealthy attachment and potential interference with adjustment. Sarah Collins, a former Hope Haven staff member, came forward with documents about the Rivera twins. Despite being identical twins, Maria had been labeled adoptable while her sister Anna was deemed problematic through carefully worded assessments. The separation had devastated both girls, leading to severe emotional trauma that took years of therapy to address. Philip hired a team to track down these separated siblings. The stories they shared were devastating. Many had never recovered from the forced separations. Some had aged out of the system, carrying deep emotional scars that affected their adult relationships. Others had lost track of their siblings entirely, their bonds severed by distance and bureaucracy. One particularly haunting case involved the Anderson brothers Michael and David. Rachel had orchestrated David's adoption while arranging Michael's transfer to a residential treatment facility, citing behavioral concerns that other staff members had never observed. Years later, Michael still searched for his brother through social media, his posts a digital trail of heartbreak. Eleanor's old journals provided crucial context. She had documented her concerns about these separations, noting changes in children's behavior and emotional well-being after losing their siblings. Her detailed observations stood in stark contrast to Rachel's clinical reports, revealing the human cost of these bureaucratic decisions. The investigation uncovered a pattern in Rachel's methodology. She consistently targeted pairs where one sibling was significantly older, using age differences to justify separation. Her reports followed a template, building cases for separation through seemingly objective observations that, when examined closely, revealed deep bias. Former Hope Haven residents began coming forward with their stories. Many had witnessed these separations firsthand, carrying guilt for years about their silence. Their testimonies painted a picture of systematic emotional abuse disguised as professional intervention. Philip discovered a support group formed by separated siblings who had reconnected as adults. Their stories were eerily similar. All involved carefully crafted reports that painted older siblings as problematic influences. All bore Rachel's signature methodology. The group had documented dozens of cases spanning Rachel's career. Most disturbing were the long-term effects. Many separated siblings struggled with trust issues, depression, and difficulty forming relationships. Some had developed severe attachment disorders, their ability to connect with others permanently damaged by the trauma of forced separation. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a child psychologist who had worked with several affected children, provided expert testimony about the psychological impact of these separations. Her research showed that siblings often served as crucial support systems for foster children, making forced separation particularly traumatic. Through social media, Philip located Marcus Thompson, now 25, who had been separated from his younger sister under Rachel's recommendation 10 years ago. She destroyed not just our relationship, Marcus shared, but our ability to trust the system meant to protect us. I never saw my sister again. The investigation revealed a correlation between Rachel's personal failed adoption experience and the timing of her campaign against sibling relationships. Her reports became increasingly hostile toward older siblings shortly after her own attempted adoption ended badly. Eleanor introduced Philip to Grace Peterson, a former social worker who had resigned in protest over one of Rachel's separation cases. Grace provided internal memos showing how Rachel had systematically dismissed concerns raised by other professionals about the impact of sibling separation. The scope of the investigation expanded as more cases emerged. A pattern of facilities like Riverside Youth Center being used as convenient dumping grounds for problematic older siblings became clear. These institutions often had limited resources for maintaining family connections, effectively ensuring permanent separation. Through court records, Philip discovered that Rachel had testified in numerous adoption cases, consistently advocating for sibling separation under the guise of fresh starts and healthy attachment formation. Her testimony had influenced dozens of judicial decisions. A former Riverside staff member revealed how children transferred there often arrived with similar paperwork, all bearing Rachel's distinctive assessment style, all justifying separation from younger siblings. Many of these children had exhibited severe emotional distress, their behavior attributed to pre-existing conditions rather than the trauma of separation. The evidence mounted altered reports, suppressed positive evaluations, manipulated incident records. Each case added to a damning picture of systematic abuse of professional authority, all serving a personal vendetta against older foster children. Philip compiled the findings into a comprehensive report, documenting not just individual cases but the pattern of behavior that connected them. The document revealed how one person's prejudice, hidden behind professional credentials, had torn apart countless families. As the investigation concluded, Philip realized he had uncovered more than just professional misconduct. He had exposed a fundamental flaw in a system that allowed personal bias to override the basic human right of siblings to maintain their bonds. The evidence would not only challenge Rachel's authority, but potentially lead to broader reforms in how sibling relationships were protected in the foster care system. The county courthouse buzzed with tension on the morning of the hearing. Judge Robert Williams's courtroom was packed beyond capacity, filled with Hope Haven staff, former foster children affected by Rachel's decisions, and members of the press who had caught wind of the explosive case. At the center of it all sat Brittany and Denise, holding hands so tightly their knuckles had turned white. Philip Mason stood before the court, his corporate polish replaced by passionate determination. "Your Honor." He began, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. "What we present today isn't just about two sisters. It's about a systematic abuse of power that has torn apart countless families under the guise of professional judgment." Rachel Thompson sat at the opposition table, her usual confident demeanor showing cracks as Philip's legal team began presenting their evidence. The first blow came from Eleanor Mitchell, whose testimony chronicled years of healthy interaction between the sisters, supported by detailed documentation that contradicted Rachel's reports. "I've watched these girls grow together," Eleanor testified, her voice carrying decades of experience. "What MS Thompson labels as unhealthy dependency is actually one of the most beautiful examples of sibling support I've seen in 30 years of childcare. Denise helped Brittany overcome severe trauma through patience and love, while Brittany gave Denise a reason to trust again." The court fell silent as Philip's team presented video evidence showing Rachel's reports were fabricated. Security footage from Hope Haven revealed that incidents she claimed to have witnessed couldn't have occurred as described. Dates didn't match, locations were wrong, and her observations contradicted recorded reality. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a leading child psychologist, provided expert testimony about the importance of sibling bonds in foster care. Separating these sisters wouldn't just be cruel. She explained it would be psychologically devastating. Their relationship isn't codependent, it's a crucial support system that has helped both girls thrive despite significant trauma. The most powerful moment came when Marcus Thompson, a victim of Rachel's previous separations, took the stand. Now an adult, he described the lasting impact of being separated from his younger sister. "I never saw her again," he testified, his voice breaking. MS Thompson's report said it was for the best, that I was a negative influence. I was 13. My sister was 8. We were all each other had. Rachel's cross-examination of witnesses grew increasingly desperate as her carefully constructed narrative crumbled. When she attempted to dismiss Eleanor's documentation as emotionally biased, the judge himself interrupted, pointing out that emotional investment in children's welfare was hardly a negative quality in childcare professionals. Philip's testimony marked a turning point in the proceedings. He described his own journey from seeking to replace his lost daughter to understanding true family bonds. "I came to Hope Haven looking for a child to fill a void," he admitted. "Instead, I found two sisters who taught me that family isn't about replacing what's lost, it's about opening your heart to new love." The courtroom stirred as Philip announced his intention to adopt both girls. "Your Honor, I'm not just asking to adopt Brittany anymore. I'm asking for the chance to keep a family together, to give both these extraordinary young women the home they deserve. Denise isn't a complication to be removed, she's an essential part of the family I hope to build." Brittany's testimony, though brief, moved many to tears. She described her hunger strike not as manipulation but as the only way she knew to fight for her family. "Denise is my sister," she said simply. "Not because someone told us we were, but because we chose each other. Why is that less real than being born sisters?" Throughout the proceedings, evidence of Rachel's pattern of separating siblings continued to mount. Case after case was presented, showing nearly identical language in reports, similar justifications for transfers, and a clear bias against older siblings in foster care. Her methodology, once examined in detail, revealed a disturbing pattern of personal prejudice masked as professional judgment, The hearing reached its emotional peak when Denise took the stand. Unlike her previous appearances before authorities, where she had been defensive and afraid, she spoke with quiet dignity about her relationship with Brittany. She described their first meeting, their shared struggles, their dreams of staying together. "I promised to protect her," Denise testified, "but this isn't just about protection anymore. We make each other better. We make each other whole." Philip's closing argument drew together all the threads of evidence into a powerful plea for justice. He spoke not just as a prospective adoptive parent, but as someone who had witnessed firsthand the damage done by prejudice and presumption. "Your Honor," he concluded, "we have an opportunity here to right not just one wrong, but to acknowledge that family bonds don't always follow traditional patterns. Sometimes the strongest families are the ones we choose." As Judge Williams called for a recess to consider his decision, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Philip had presented not just a case for keeping Denise and Brittany together, but a challenge to the entire system's approach to sibling relationships in foster care. The fate of two sisters hung in the balance, along with the potential for broader change in how the system viewed and valued sibling bonds. The break gave everyone time to reflect on the magnitude of what had been revealed. Rachel sat alone at her table, the weight of her exposed actions visible in her posture. Philip huddled with his legal team, reviewing notes and preparing for any possible challenges to their position. And in the middle of it all, Denise and Brittany remained together, their unified presence the strongest testament to what they were fighting for. The breaking point in the hearing came unexpectedly through a former colleague of Rachel Thompson who could no longer bear the weight of complicity. Sarah Bennett, a veteran social worker who had worked alongside Rachel for 15 years, requested to address the court with new evidence that would shatter Rachel's professional facade completely. "Your Honor." Sarah began, her voice trembling but determined. "I've spent years watching Rachel systematically destroy sibling relationships based on her personal trauma. What happened with her failed adoption of Amy Peterson 15 years ago wasn't just a professional setback. It became an obsession that warped her entire approach to older children in the system." The courtroom fell silent as Sarah revealed a cache of private emails and unofficial notes that exposed the full extent of Rachel's manipulation. The documents showed a deliberate pattern of targeting sibling groups where one child was significantly older, using carefully crafted language to make normal protective behaviors appear pathological. She would alter reports, Sarah testified, producing original documents with Rachel's handwritten changes. Simple interactions between siblings would be reframed as concerning patterns. Notes from other professionals that supported keeping siblings together would mysteriously disappear from official files. The evidence revealed a sophisticated system of manipulation. Rachel had created a network of preferred facilities like Riverside Youth Center, where older siblings could be efficiently isolated from younger ones. She had developed relationships with sympathetic administrators who would accept her transfers without question, effectively trapping older children in a system designed to separate them from their siblings. Philip's legal team presented a timeline of Rachel's cases, showing how her reports became increasingly hostile towards sibling relationships after her failed adoption experience. The pattern was clear. What had started as personal bias had evolved into a systematic campaign against older foster children maintaining connections with younger siblings. Former Hope Haven employees came forward with stories of being pressured to modify their observations to align with Rachel's assessments. Those who refused found their reports mysteriously missing from official files, their concerns dismissed as unprofessional emotional attachment to their charges. The most damning evidence came from Rachel's own computer files, obtained through legal discovery. Hidden folders contained templates for separation justifications, pre-written assessments that could be easily modified to fit different cases, and a tracking system for monitoring the success of her separations. Dr. Martinez, analyzing the psychological impact of Rachel's actions, presented research showing the devastating effects of her campaign. We're looking at hundreds of children who have suffered severe attachment disorders, depression, and trust issues as a direct result of these forced separations, she testified. The trauma inflicted by these actions will affect many of these children for the rest of their lives. Rachel's composed professional demeanor finally cracked under the weight of the evidence. When confronted with a particularly emotional letter from a separated sibling pair, she burst out, "They don't understand. Older children are damaged, they carry their trauma like a disease. I was trying to protect the younger ones from being infected by their pain." The outburst revealed the deep-seated prejudice driving her actions. Her personal experience with one troubled teenager had led her to view all older foster children as threats to younger ones, regardless of the actual dynamics of their relationships. Eleanor Mitchell provided context for Rachel's systemic manipulation, producing years of correspondence where she had attempted to challenge Rachel's assessments. "Each time I raised concerns, I was told I was too emotionally involved," Eleanor testified. "But how can you care for children without emotional investment? That's not bias, it's humanity." The court heard testimony from administrative staff who had been coerced into backdating documents and altering records at Rachel's direction. Each revelation added to the picture of a professional who had abused her position to enact a personal vendetta against older foster children. Phillips investigators uncovered financial connections between Rachel and certain adoption agencies that prioritized placing younger children with wealthy families. The agencies had provided incentives for separating sibling groups, making younger children more marketable, by removing older siblings from the picture. The exposure of Rachel's conspiracy had implications beyond the immediate case. Other social workers began coming forward with similar stories from different districts, suggesting a broader systemic issue in how sibling relationships were evaluated and valued in the foster care system. As the evidence mounted, Judge Williams's expression grew increasingly grave. The case had expanded from a simple adoption hearing to an expose of systematic abuse of professional authority. The implications would ripple through the entire child welfare system. Rachel's final attempt to defend her actions only served to further expose her bias. "I was trying to give these younger children their best chance," she insisted. "How can they have a fresh start when they're tied to siblings who carry the weight of their shared trauma?" The courtroom's reaction to this statement was palpable. The deep prejudice underlying her words, the assumption that shared trauma was a contaminant rather than a bond, revealed how thoroughly her personal experience had corrupted her professional judgment. As Rachel's conspiracy unraveled, the strength of Denise and Brittany's bond stood in stark contrast to her dark view of sibling relationships. Their unity, maintained despite every effort to break it, served as powerful testament to the resilience of family bonds that form through choice and love, rather than mere circumstance. Judge Robert Williams sat behind his imposing oak desk, his stern expression masking the turmoil within as he prepared to deliver what would become one of the most controversial decisions of his career. Despite the overwhelming evidence of Rachel's misconduct, legal precedent and system regulations presented significant obstacles to Phillips' unprecedented request for joint adoption. After careful consideration of all presented evidence, Judge Williams began, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom, "While I find Ms. Thompson's actions deeply troubling and worthy of separate investigation, I am bound by current adoption regulations which prioritize traditional family structures and age-appropriate placements. Therefore, I must initially deny Mr. Mason's petition for joint adoption." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Brittany's small hands gripped Denise's tighter, while Philip stood frozen, disbelief etched across his features. Judge Williams raised his hand for silence before continuing to explain his decision, citing specific statutes that made approving such an unusual adoption legally problematic. "The law, as currently written," he elaborated, "does not adequately address situations where an adult seeks to adopt both an older and younger child who are not biologically related. While Mr. Mason's intentions are admirable, Approving such an adoption could set a precedent that our current legal framework is not prepared to support. Eleanor Mitchell, who had been taking notes throughout the proceedings, dropped her pen in frustration. The judge's adherence to regulatory constraints seemed to ignore the human element at the core of the case. Philip's legal team immediately began shuffling papers, preparing for an appeal, while Rachel Thompson's slight smile suggested she felt vindicated despite her exposed misconduct. The judge continued, outlining the technical reasons for his decision. He cited concerns about age gaps in adoption, questioned the stability of non-biological sibling bonds, and expressed worry about setting precedents that might complicate future cases. Each point felt like another brick in a wall separating the sisters. Brittany, understanding enough to know things weren't going well, began to cry silently. Denise wrapped her arm around her sister's shoulders, her own face a mask of controlled pain. Their reactions sparked a wave of emotional responses throughout the courtroom, with many observers openly wiping away tears. Philip stood to address the court again, his voice carrying the weight of genuine emotion. "Your Honor, with all due respect, are we not allowing bureaucracy to triumph over humanity? These regulations were created to protect children, not to tear apart existing family bonds." The judge's response was measured but firm. "Mr. Mason, I sympathize with your position, but I cannot simply ignore established legal frameworks. The law must evolve through proper channels, not through emotional appeals in individual cases." However, as Judge Williams observed the devastating impact of his words on the two sisters, something shifted in his expression. He added an unusual addendum to his ruling: "I will delay the final implementation of this decision for 30 days, during which time I strongly encourage Mr. Mason's legal team to petition for emergency amendments to current adoption regulations." This small concession offered a glimmer of hope, but the immediate reality remained harsh. Denise would still face transfer to Riverside Youth Center while any appeals were pending. The separation that Rachel had engineered would proceed, albeit temporarily, despite all evidence of its harmful nature. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavy with despair as the implications became clear. Philip's legal team huddled in urgent consultation, while social workers began discussing immediate transfer arrangements for Denise. The system's machinery was in motion, seemingly unstoppable despite its obvious flaws. Yet Judge Williams appeared increasingly troubled by his own ruling. His years of experience had taught him that sometimes the letter of the law failed to serve its spirit. As he watched Brittany and Denise cling to each other, his judicial mask slipped slightly, revealing the conflict between his professional obligations and his human understanding of the situation. Furthermore, he added, almost reluctantly, "I am ordering a complete investigation into Ms. Thompson's conduct and its impact on previous cases. While this may not directly affect the current adoption petition, it may have significant implications for how we handle similar cases in the future." The judge's announcement of his initial rejection marked not an ending but a transition point in the battle. Philip's determined expression suggested he had no intention of accepting this setback as final. Eleanor Mitchell was already making calls to child advocacy groups, while other social workers whispered about possible legislative interventions. As the courtroom began to empty, Judge Williams remained seated, watching the sisters comfort each other. His decision, though legally sound, felt hollow in the face of their obvious bond. The 30-day delay he had granted reflected his own internal struggle with a system that sometimes protected its rules at the expense of its purpose. The initial rejection would prove to be just another obstacle in the longer journey toward justice, but in that moment it felt like an insurmountable wall. Yet even as hope seemed to fade, the strength of the sisters' bond and Philip's determination suggested that this story was far from over. The night before her scheduled transfer to Riverside Youth Center, Denise Evans made a desperate decision. The full moon cast long shadows across Hope Haven's grounds as she silently packed a small backpack with essentials, some clothes, the few dollars she had saved, and most importantly, photos of herself and Brittany. At midnight, when the night staff made their usual rounds, Denise slipped out of her bed, careful not to wake the other girls. She had memorized the guard schedules, knew which floorboards creaked, and had calculated exactly how long it would take to reach the old oak tree where she and Brittany had spent so many happy hours. Her plan was simple but desperate. She would hide in the city, find work somewhere, and somehow maintain contact with Brittany. In her 16-year-old mind, any alternative seemed better than being sent away from her sister. She had left a note on her pillow: "I'm not running away from something, I'm running toward someone. Please understand." As she crept down the hallway, a floorboard creaked unexpectedly. Denise froze, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give her away. But it wasn't a staff member who emerged from the shadows, it was Brittany, clutching her own hastily packed backpack. "I knew you would try to leave," Brittany whispered, her small face determined in the moonlight. "I'm coming with you. We promised to stay together." Remember the sight of her 7-year-old sister, ready to face the streets, rather than be separated, brought Denise's plan crashing down around her. Reality hit hard as Denise looked at Brittany's innocent face. How could she protect a 7-year-old on the streets? Where would they sleep? What would they eat? The responsibility of her sister's safety overwhelmed her impulsive plan. But before Denise could respond, lights flooded the hallway. Eleanor Mitchell stood at the end of the corridor, her face a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Oh, my dear girl," she said softly, "I've been expecting this." She had known Denise well enough to anticipate her attempt to escape. What followed was chaos. Other staff members arrived. Rachel Thompson was called in despite the late hour, and Philip Mason was notified. As Denise was led back to her room, she could hear Brittany's protests echoing through the halls. "Don't take her away. Please. We promised to stay together." Rachel Thompson arrived looking triumphant. Using the escape attempt as further evidence of Denise's negative influence, she immediately began writing notes, presumably for another damning report. "This proves exactly what I've been saying," she declared. "This kind of desperate behavior is precisely why separation is necessary." Philip Mason arrived just as Denise was being secured in her room under watch. The sight of the teenage girl, defeated and broken, clutching a photo of herself and Brittany, hit him harder than he expected. This wasn't the action of a troubled teen with attachment issues. This was a sister trying desperately to keep her family together. Eleanor Mitchell stood guard outside Denise's room that night, not to prevent another escape attempt, but to protect her from Rachel's attempts to interview her in her vulnerable state. Through the door, she could hear Denise's muffled sobs, each one a testament to the pain of impending separation. As dawn broke, Hope Haven was quiet except for the sound of a transport van arriving from Riverside Youth Center. Denise sat on her bed, no longer crying, her face set in a mask of resignation. Her failed escape attempt had not only failed to prevent the separation but had given Rachel more ammunition against her. The tragedy wasn't just in the failed escape, but in the systemic failure that had driven a responsible, caring teenager to such desperate measures. As Denise was led to the transport van, the weight of her defeat was visible in every step. Her last glimpse of Hope Haven would be of Brittany's face pressed against a window, their separation now inevitable despite their desperate attempt to prevent it. The day after Denise's transfer, Brittany's emotional state deteriorated rapidly. Her small body, already weakened from the previous hunger strike, began to show signs of severe stress. The normally vibrant child became a ghost of herself, wandering the halls of Hope Haven like a lost soul. During morning classes, Brittany collapsed while trying to complete a simple art project, her first attempt at drawing since Denise's departure. The school nurse found her temperature dangerously high, her body finally surrendering to the combined effects of emotional trauma and physical exhaustion. Within hours, she was rushed to Boston Children's Hospital. The emergency room doctors diagnosed severe dehydration, malnutrition, and acute stress response. Her vital signs were unstable, her small body fighting against the overwhelming emotional and physical strain. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Anderson, noted in her report patient exhibits symptoms consistent with severe emotional trauma, manifesting in dangerous physical deterioration. Philip Mason arrived at the hospital to find Brittany connected to various monitors, an IV delivering essential fluids to her depleted system. The sight of her tiny form lost in the hospital bed struck him with the full weight of his role in this tragedy. Her artwork, which had once been so full of color and life, now lay untouched on her bedside table, the papers as blank as her expression. "She's experiencing what we call an acute stress response," Dr. Anderson explained to Philip. "Her body is literally shutting down in response to emotional trauma. Children her age shouldn't have to endure this level of psychological distress." The doctor's words carried an implicit criticism of the system that had allowed this to happen. At night, the hospital staff reported hearing Brittany calling out for Denise in her sleep. Her nightmares became so severe that sedation was eventually necessary to allow her body the rest it desperately needed. The nurses noted that she would clutch a worn photograph of herself and Denise even in her medicated sleep. Rachel Thompson attempted to visit, clipboard in hand, presumably to document this latest development. The hospital staff, led by Dr. Anderson, firmly denied her access to Brittany's room. "This child needs healing, not documentation," the doctor stated firmly, placing herself between Rachel and the hospital room door. Eleanor Mitchell spent her free hours at Brittany's bedside, reading the stories that Denise used to read to her sister. The familiar words seemed to have a calming effect, though Brittany remained largely unresponsive. Each story was a painful reminder of what had been torn away from this already traumatized child. But the hospital psychiatrist, Dr. James Bennett, was brought in to evaluate Brittany's mental state. His assessment was damning. Patient exhibits symptoms of severe attachment disruption trauma. The forced separation from her primary emotional support has created a psychological crisis that manifests in physical symptoms. Philip, watching Brittany's continuing decline, finally reached his breaking point. In the sterile hospital corridor, he confronted Rachel Thompson, who had returned for another attempt to document the situation. "Are you satisfied now?" he demanded. "Is this enough proof of the damage you've caused?" Rachel's only response was to make another note in her ever-present file. Days passed, and while Brittany's physical condition stabilized somewhat, her emotional state remained fragile. She would spend hours staring out the hospital window, as if searching for someone in the distance. The child psychologist noted that her drawings, when she could be convinced to attempt them, showed only broken hearts and separated figures. The hospital staff began documenting everything meticulously, not for bureaucratic purposes like Rachel, but to build a case for the dangerous effects of forced sibling separation. Each nurse's note, each doctor's observation became part of a growing body of evidence about the real cost of the system's failure. A particularly heartbreaking moment came when Brittany, in a brief moment of lucidity, asked Philip a question that cut to the heart of the matter. "If love is supposed to be good, why does it hurt so much?" The question left him speechless, confronting the fundamental cruelty of a system that could turn a child's capacity for love into a source of such profound suffering. The hospital room, with its beeping monitors and sterile walls, became a testimony to the human cost of bureaucratic decisions. Each day that Brittany remained, there was another indictment of the system that had prioritized rules over relationships, procedures over people, and policy over the basic human need for connection. Sitting in the dimly lit hospital room, watching Brittany's restless sleep, Philip Mason experienced an epiphany that would fundamentally change his perspective on family and love. The steady beeping of medical monitors provided a rhythm to his thoughts as he confronted the truth he had been avoiding. He pulled out his wallet and looked at the worn photo of Sarah, his lost daughter, that he always carried. For the first time, he saw clearly how his grief had colored his initial intentions with Brittany. He had been seeking to replace what was lost, to recreate a family that could never truly be restored. "I've been so blind," he whispered to himself, watching Brittany's chest rise and fall with each troubled breath. He realized that his focus on recreating his lost family had made him complicit in destroying another. The irony struck him hard. In his attempt to heal his own pain, he had contributed to inflicting similar pain on two innocent souls. The realization deepened as he recalled Brittany's artwork from her early days at his mansion. She had always drawn two figures, never one, but he had chosen to see only what he wanted to see. Her art hadn't been incomplete, it had been telling a truth he refused to acknowledge. A nurse entered to check Brittany's vitals, commenting on how the child seemed to breathe easier when holding the photo of herself and Denise. Something about this simple observation broke through Philip's final defenses. Family wasn't about replacing what was lost, it was about opening your heart to new love while honoring what came before. He thought about Sarah, really thought about her for the first time in years. His daughter had always wanted a sister, had dreamed of sharing her room, her toys, her life with a sibling. Would she have wanted him to separate two sisters who had found each other against all odds? The monitors beeped steadily as Philip made his way to the window, looking out at the Boston skyline. His mansion, which he had so carefully prepared for one child, suddenly seemed emptier than ever. He had been trying to fill it with a replacement when what it really needed was to become a home for a new kind of family. Eleanor Mitchell found him there hours later, still standing by the window. "You know," she said gently, "sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into." Her words crystallized everything Philip had been feeling. He turned to face her, his decision already made. "I've been trying to recreate the past instead of building a future," he admitted. "These girls don't need someone to separate them or to make them into something they're not. They need someone to protect their bond, to give them a place where they can grow together." Looking at Brittany's sleeping form, Philip saw not just a child who reminded him of Sarah, but a complete person with her own needs, her own loves, and her own family bonds. The realization brought both pain and liberation: pain at recognizing his earlier blindness, and liberation in finally seeing the truth. "Sarah would have loved them both," he said softly, touching his daughter's photo one last time before putting it away. This wasn't about replacing her, it was about honoring her memory by opening his heart to love in a new way. That night, Philip began making calls to his lawyers, to child advocacy groups, to anyone who might help him fight not just for Brittany's adoption, but for Denise as well. He wasn't seeking to create a replacement family anymore, he was fighting to preserve and protect one that already existed. As dawn broke over the hospital, Philip had found his new purpose. He would no longer be the man who tried to separate sisters for his own needs. Instead, he would become the father who fought to keep them together, who understood that true family transcended blood ties and legal documents. The breakthrough came unexpectedly through Amy Peterson, the very teenager whose failed adoption 15 years ago had triggered Rachel Thompson's crusade against older foster children. Now 31, Amy arrived at Philip's office clutching a folder of old documents that would expose the dark truth behind Rachel's actions. "I need to tell you what really happened," Amy began, her hands trembling as she spread photographs and letters across Philip's desk. "Rachel Thompson didn't fail to adopt me, I escaped from her. What she's doing to Denise and other teenagers, she tried to do to me first." The documents revealed a disturbing pattern. Rachel's home had been less a sanctuary than a prison, where Amy's every move was monitored and controlled. Letters Amy had written describing her treatment had never reached authorities, intercepted and hidden away by Rachel herself. "She was obsessed with fixing me," Amy explained, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "Every connection to my past, especially my younger sister in another foster home, was seen as a contamination that needed to be eliminated. When I refused to cut ties with my sister, things got ugly." Among Amy's documents were Rachel's personal journals from that period, obtained through years of legal battles. The entries revealed a mindset that had grown increasingly paranoid and controlling. Rachel had convinced herself that older foster children were irreparably damaged and that her mission was to protect younger ones from their influence. Philip's investigators quickly connected the dots between Amy's experience and Rachel's subsequent career choices. Every separation she had engineered, every transfer she had arranged, followed the same pattern as her attempted control of Amy. The tactics she had failed to perfect with one teenager had been refined and systematized in her professional role. The most damning evidence came from Rachel's private correspondence with Riverside Youth Center. Emails revealed that she had specifically chosen the facility for its strict policies limiting outside contact. She had been deliberately sending older siblings there, knowing they would effectively disappear from their younger siblings' lives. Amy's testimony painted a picture of Rachel's methods that exactly matched what was happening with Denise. She starts by isolating the older child, Amy explained. Then she documents every reaction to that isolation as proof of instability. It's a perfect trap. The more you fight to maintain your relationships, the more she uses that fight against you. Eleanor Mitchell, listening to Amy's story, recognized the same tactics being used at Hope Haven. She's been doing this right under our noses, Eleanor realized. Every time we saw devotion between siblings, she was seeing contamination. Every protective instinct was reframed as control. The revelation of Rachel's personal vendetta transformed the legal landscape of the case. This wasn't just about one social worker's prejudice, it was about a systematic abuse of power driven by unresolved trauma and a distorted mission to protect that actually caused harm. Philip's legal team quickly moved to have all of Rachel's previous cases reviewed. The pattern they uncovered was staggering: dozens of older siblings transferred to restrictive facilities, hundreds of relationships severed, all justified by reports that echoed Rachel's experience with Amy. As Amy finished sharing her story, she pulled out one final document, a photo of herself with her sister, taken recently at her sister's wedding. "We found each other again," she said, "but it took 15 years. Some siblings never do. This has to stop." The truth about Rachel's vendetta provided the key to challenging not just Denise's transfer, but the entire system that had allowed one person's unresolved trauma to devastate so many young lives. Amy's testimony would become the foundation for a broader challenge to how sibling relationships were valued and protected in the foster care system. The story of Denise and Brittany broke in the Boston Globe on a Sunday morning, the headline reading "Separated Sisters, the Hidden Cost of Foster Care Politics." Within hours, the article went viral, touching hearts and igniting outrage across social media platforms. Local news stations picked up the story, featuring interviews with former Hope Haven residents who shared similar experiences of forced separation. The image of Brittany in her hospital bed, clutching a photo of Denise, became a powerful symbol of a system that prioritized procedure over human connection. A grassroots movement emerged almost overnight. Keep Sisters Together started trending on social media, with thousands sharing their own stories of sibling separation in the foster care system. Former foster children, adoptive parents, and child welfare advocates began organizing protests outside the county courthouse. Community leaders stepped forward to support the cause. Local church groups organized prayer vigils outside Hope Haven, while university students staged peaceful demonstrations at Riverside Youth Center. The City Council announced an emergency session to review foster care policies regarding sibling relationships. Philip's corporate connections proved invaluable as business leaders joined the campaign. CEOs wrote open letters supporting reform, and several major companies offered to establish scholarship funds for older foster children seeking adoption. The corporate pressure added weight to the growing demand for systemic change. Local artists created a mural on a downtown building depicting Denise and Brittany's story, their joined hands stretching across the wall as a symbol of unbreakable bonds. The artwork became a gathering point for supporters and a powerful visual representation of the movement's message. Professional organizations began speaking out. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry issued a statement about the psychological importance of maintaining sibling bonds in foster care. Child welfare experts published opinion pieces challenging the practice of separating siblings for convenience. The media attention reached its peak when a national morning show featured Amy Peterson sharing her story about Rachel Thompson, alongside interviews with other victims of similar separations. The broadcast sparked a nationwide conversation about reform in the foster care system. Support poured in from unexpected places. A group of retired judges formed an advocacy committee to review similar cases and propose legislative changes. Law firms offered pro bono services to help reunite separated siblings, and mental health professionals volunteered counseling services. The groundswell of public support transformed the narrative from a single case into a movement for systemic change. What had begun as one family's struggle became a catalyst for examining how the foster care system approached sibling relationships and older child adoption. Through it all, Philip worked tirelessly to channel the public attention constructively. He established a foundation dedicated to supporting sibling groups in foster care, ensuring that the momentum would continue beyond his daughter's case. The community's response demonstrated that Denise and Brittany's story had touched a deep chord in the public consciousness. Their struggle highlighted universal themes about family, love, and the human need for connection that transcended the specific details of their case. As public pressure mounted, even those who had initially supported Rachel's position began to reconsider. The wave of personal stories and expert testimony made it increasingly difficult to defend policies that treated sibling relationships as disposable conveniences rather than essential bonds. The media spotlight and community support created an environment where change seemed not just possible but inevitable. What had started as one man's fight to adopt two sisters had evolved into a movement that would reshape how society viewed and valued sibling relationships in foster care. Judge Robert Williams sat in his chambers late into the night, surrounded by mountains of new evidence that had transformed the case he thought he understood. The revelation of Rachel Thompson's personal vendetta, combined with the overwhelming public response, forced him to re-examine not just this case, but his entire approach to family law. The judge methodically reviewed Amy Peterson's testimony, his experienced eyes finding patterns that connected her experience to dozens of other cases. Rachel's systematic campaign against sibling relationships wasn't just unethical, it represented a fundamental perversion of the system's purpose to protect and nurture children. Medical reports from Boston Children's Hospital provided stark evidence of the physical and psychological damage caused by forced separation. Dr. Anderson's detailed documentation of Brittany's decline spoke louder than any legal argument. The child's body itself was testifying to the trauma of losing her sister. The judge paid particular attention to a new psychological assessment of Denise conducted at Riverside Youth Center. Unlike Rachel's biased reports, this evaluation showed a mature, responsible teenager whose protective instincts toward her sister represented healthy attachment rather than dangerous codependency. Expert testimonies from child development specialists challenged the legal presumptions that had shaped his initial ruling. These professionals argued convincingly that maintaining sibling bonds should be given equal weight to traditional adoption criteria, especially in cases involving trauma survivors. The law should protect what works, Judge Williams muttered to himself, reviewing statistics about outcomes for siblings who remained together versus those who were separated. The numbers told a clear story: children who maintained their sibling relationships showed better emotional adjustment and higher success rates in permanent placements. Philip Mason's petition for joint adoption now appeared in a new light. What had seemed like an unusual request revealed itself as an opportunity to recognize and protect a family bond that had formed naturally through love and choice rather than biology. The judge was particularly moved by letters from other children at Hope Haven describing how Denise and Brittany's relationship had inspired and supported them. These testimonials painted a picture not of unhealthy dependency, but of a healing connection that benefited the entire community. Legal precedents that had initially seemed to prevent the joint adoption now appeared unnecessarily rigid when weighed against the human cost of separation. Judge Williams began drafting a new opinion that would challenge these precedents while remaining within the boundaries of existing law. Rachel Thompson's exposed bias provided the legal foundation for reversing the previous ruling. Her compromised judgment had tainted every aspect of the case, from initial assessments to placement recommendations. The judge could now justify a complete re-evaluation of all her findings. Community support, while not technically a legal factor, demonstrated the broader social implications of the case. The judge recognized that his decision would either reinforce or challenge systemic biases against older foster children and sibling relationships. As dawn approached, Judge Williams reached for a fresh legal pad and began drafting his revised opinion. His words would need to do more than justify a different outcome. They needed to establish a new framework for evaluating sibling relationships in foster care. The judge crafted his argument carefully, knowing it would face scrutiny as precedent for future cases. He emphasized the importance of examining each case's unique circumstances rather than applying rigid rules that could destroy genuine family bonds. Eleanor Mitchell's years of documentation provided the historical context needed to support his new position. Her detailed records showed the consistent positive impact of the sisters' relationship, contrasting sharply with Rachel's selective and biased reporting. As he concluded his draft, Judge Williams felt the weight of the moment. His decision would not just affect two sisters, it would signal a fundamental shift in how the legal system viewed and valued the bonds between foster siblings. The law, he realized, needed to protect not just the letter of family rights, but their spirit as well. The courtroom was packed to capacity on the morning of Judge Williams' final ruling. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting a warm glow over the assembled crowd. Brittany, released from the hospital but still looking fragile, sat between Philip and Eleanor, while Denise, brought back from Riverside Youth Center, tried to maintain her composure despite her obvious exhaustion. Judge Williams entered the courtroom with deliberate steps, his face bearing the gravity of a decision that would reshape lives and potentially change the system itself. The rustling of papers and whispered conversations died away as he took his seat, the entire room holding its breath. In light of new evidence and careful reconsideration, he began, his voice clear and strong, "I am reversing my previous ruling. Furthermore, I am approving Mr. Philip Mason's petition for joint adoption of both Brittany Adams and Denise Evans." The silence broke into a wave of emotion. Brittany leapt from her seat, rushing to embrace Denise despite the bailiff's half-hearted attempt to maintain decorum. Their tears of joy mingled as they held each other, finally secure in the knowledge that no one could separate them again. Philip moved to join his daughters, now officially his daughters, his own eyes glistening with tears. The three of them formed a tight circle, their embrace representing the new family they had become. Eleanor Mitchell watched from her seat, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, her years of advocacy finally vindicated. Rachel Thompson was notably absent, having been suspended pending investigation. Her empty chair served as a symbol of the old system that had prioritized rules over relationships, policy over people. The judge continued, his words carrying historic weight. "This case has revealed serious flaws in how we evaluate sibling relationships in foster care. Love does not always follow traditional patterns, and our system must evolve to recognize and protect bonds that form through choice as well as blood." As he spoke, Brittany pulled out her sketchbook, the first time she had drawn since Denise's transfer. With quick, sure strokes, she began creating a new picture, three figures holding hands under a bright sun, their smiles radiating joy. It was the first time she had drawn herself with more than one other person. The judge's final words resonated through the courtroom. Family is not defined by biology alone, nor by traditional structures. It is defined by love, commitment, and the bonds that form when hearts choose to beat as one. Let this ruling stand as recognition of that truth. Outside the courthouse, supporters erupted in cheers as the new family emerged. The Keep Sisters Together campaign had evolved into a movement for broader reform, with Philip's case serving as a catalyst for change throughout the foster care system. Denise, still holding Brittany's hand tightly, looked up at Philip with new eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, "for fighting for both of us." Philip's response was to pull both girls closer, understanding that he hadn't just given them a home, they had given him a chance to heal and love again. The three of them stood there for a moment, silhouetted against the courthouse columns, representing a new kind of family born from adversity but strengthened by choice. Behind them, the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, as if nature itself was celebrating their victory. Eleanor Mitchell's voice captured the moment perfectly as she watched them leave. "Sometimes the families we choose are the ones that teach us the most about love." The sisters' journey had not just ended in victory, it had opened the door for countless others to follow. The transition from Hope Haven to Philip's mansion unfolded like the opening chapters of a new book. This time, both sisters moved together, their belongings mingling in the back of Philip's car as they drove toward their new home. The mansion that had once felt empty and imposing to Brittany now seemed to welcome them with open arms. Philip had transformed Sarah's old playroom into an art studio for both girls, with two easels standing side by side near the window. The walls, once a shrine to loss, now displayed both Sarah's preserved artwork and empty spaces waiting to be filled with new memories. It was a perfect metaphor for their family honoring the past while embracing the future. The first night in their new home, the sisters shared Brittany's room, neither quite ready for separation, even in sleep. Philip found them in the morning, curled together like quotation marks, their faces peaceful for the first time in weeks. He quietly closed the door, understanding that healing would happen in its own time. Days melted into weeks as they established new routines. Breakfast became a time for sharing dreams from the night before, with Philip learning to interpret the sisters' private language of inside jokes and half-finished sentences. Denise discovered a talent for cooking, while Brittany filled the house with increasingly colorful artwork. The transformation was most visible in their art. Brittany's drawings evolved from separated figures to vibrant family scenes, always featuring three people together. Denise, inspired by her sister, began writing stories to accompany the artwork, their creative collaboration filling the mansion with new energy. School presentations became family events, with both girls attending each other's performances and Philip beaming proudly from the audience. Teachers noted the positive changes in both sisters, Brittany's grades improving as her anxiety decreased, Denise's natural leadership qualities emerging as she felt secure in her new role. Philip learned to navigate the delicate balance of being both authority figure and healing presence. He discovered that sometimes the best parenting happened in quiet moments, helping with homework, listening to their stories, or simply being present while they worked through their remaining fears. The mansion's gardens became their special project, with each family member choosing plants to grow. Denise planted protective rows of sunflowers, while Brittany created a rainbow of wildflowers. Philip added a bench beneath the property's oldest oak tree, recognizing their need for a place similar to their spot at Hope Haven. Therapy sessions continued, but now as a family unit. They learned to talk about Sarah, about the pain of separation, about their fears and hopes. Through these conversations, they built a stronger foundation, understanding that their new family was built on choice, love, and mutual healing. Their bond grew stronger through small moments, Denise helping Brittany overcome her fear of thunderstorms, Brittany drawing special pictures for Denise's bedroom, Philip learning to braid hair, albeit clumsily, when both girls decided to teach him. Each day brought new opportunities to choose each other, to rebuild trust, to create joy. Eleanor Mitchell became a frequent visitor, her presence a bridge between their past and present. She watched with satisfaction as the mansion transformed from a mausoleum of memories into a vibrant home filled with laughter, art, and the occasional chaos that comes with raising two spirited girls. The healing wasn't always smooth. There were still nightmares, moments of insecurity, days when the past felt too close. But they faced these challenges together, each member of this unconventional family bringing their own strength to the process of becoming whole. 1 year after the adoption, Philip Mason stood at a podium in the newly renovated community center, announcing the launch of the Forever Sisters Foundation. Beside him, Denise and Brittany held hands, their presence a testament to the power of love over bureaucracy, of family bonds over system constraints. The Foundation's mission was clear: to protect and support sibling relationships in foster care. Its first initiative provided legal assistance to families seeking to adopt sibling groups, ensuring that no other children would face the battle they had endured. Philip had dedicated a significant portion of his fortune to this cause, turning their personal victory into hope for others. The program expanded rapidly, establishing support groups for separated siblings, funding research into the importance of maintaining family bonds, and creating advocacy networks to challenge outdated policies. But Denise, despite her young age, became a powerful speaker at Foundation events, her story inspiring others to fight for their own families. Brittany's artwork became the Foundation's symbol, a simple drawing of two hands clasped together, representing the unbreakable bond between siblings. Her pieces now hung in foster care offices across the state, silent reminders of what was truly at stake in every decision about sibling placement. Eleanor Mitchell joined the Foundation's board of directors, bringing decades of experience and wisdom to their mission. Under her guidance, they developed training programs for social workers, emphasizing the importance of preserving sibling relationships and recognizing the different forms family love can take. The impact rippled outward. State legislators began reviewing policies on sibling separation, using the Mason case as a catalyst for reform. Other states followed suit, recognizing that the best interests of children often meant keeping siblings together, regardless of age differences or traditional adoption preferences. Rachel Thompson's case led to a broader investigation of similar practices nationwide. The revelation of her vendetta sparked a movement to ensure that personal bias couldn't override professional judgment in child welfare decisions. Her actions, though damaging, ultimately led to stronger protections for foster children. The Foundation's most powerful work happened in quiet moments, reuniting long-separated siblings, supporting joint adoptions, and creating spaces where foster children could maintain their family bonds. Each success story added to the growing evidence that love in all its forms deserved protection and respect. On the anniversary of their adoption, the Mason family gathered in their garden, under the oak tree that had become their own special place. Denise, now preparing for college but determined to stay close to home, and Brittany, blossoming into a talented young artist, sat with Philip as the sun set. "Do you know what I've learned?" Philip asked, watching his daughters with pride. "Family isn't about replacing what's lost or fitting into someone else's mold. It's about making room in your heart for new love while honoring the bonds that already exist." The message of their story spread far beyond their community. It spoke to universal truths about the nature of family, the power of perseverance, and the importance of fighting for what matters most. Their journey showed that sometimes the most beautiful families are formed not through biology or bureaucracy, but through choice and love. The Forever Sisters Foundation became more than just an organization. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that change is possible when people stand together for what's right. In the end, the story of Denise and Brittany wasn't just about two sisters who refused to be separated. It was about redefining family and challenging a system to remember its true purpose, protecting and nurturing the bonds that help children thrive. If this story of sisterly love and triumph touched your heart, we invite you to join our storytelling community. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters in this conversation about family, love, and justice. Support our team's mission to bring more inspiring stories by subscribing to our channel and spreading hope by sharing this video with friends and family. Every like helps us reach more people with messages of love and resilience. Together, we can continue celebrating the power of unconditional love and the true meaning of family. Thank you for being part of our journey.